Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to our seminar this afternoon. My name's Glenn Innes, as you can see from the little bit on there. And if it looks like I'm coming to you from my car, well, then I am coming to you from my car. I thought I might be able to blag it, but I can't. The reality is, due to a pastoral emergency, I had to go to the hospital and I didn't make it back to my house in time. But because we live in a wonderfully digitally connected world, I am able to come to you from the passenger seat of my Mini. So welcome to my car. Much more importantly, though, today I want to say welcome to Jonas Kurlberg. Jonas is a teacher at Spurgeon's College, where he runs, is the program director for the MTH in digital theology. And it's our absolute pleasure to have Jonas with us today. So welcome, Jonas.
Thank you very much. So good to be with you, and sorry about your tough afternoon. So yeah, you're really there on the front lines, much more than I am. Well done.
This is what we sign up for, right? It's the joy of getting to journey with people in. Yeah. So, Jonas, I wonder, might you tell some folks that are with us today something about yourself that they perhaps can't just go on the internet and read about who you are? Tell us something about who Jonas is.
Well, I'm sure that you can find out most things online these days. There's very few secrets that we have. But I guess, so I'm Swedish background, but I've lived in 6 different countries, 7 different countries. And so I see myself very much like a global citizen. And maybe one of my favorite kind of fun facts is that I'm an overseas citizen of India. Okay. That's through my wife, who's a British Asian as well. So, but I've lived some part of my life in South Asia as well. So I feel a strong affinity to that part of the world as well.
Excellent. So, given all of that, I'm wondering, Jonas, as we journey into today and our time together, we're gonna spend some time. We're gonna watch a video from a church from here in Scotland, and then we're gonna ask people who are here with us today to participate by getting involved in a poll. And Al should be able to make that happen in a little moment after we've watched the video. And then we're going to hand over to you to let you teach us some things. I'm sure many of us have some teach. And then hopefully you and I are going to be able to have a little bit of a dialogue at technology working. And then it will allow everyone else to then ask questions. And we'll do a Q&A at the end. So if you're on this stream right now, if you're watching, if you're excited about digital church and what it means, if you have questions as Jonas speaks, please put them in the chat as you go along. And we want to grab those together and we can have a really good dialogue later on in our time together. But I think for now, we'll watch this video from St. Andrew's Baptist Church, which tells of their journey in digital church over the past 18 months.
My name's Clayton Mills. I am the live stream ministry leader and online coordinator for the St. Andrew's Baptist Church here in St. Andrews. And I've been in this role for just a couple of months now. I've been in Scotland since September of 2020. I started my postgraduate degrees at the University of St. Andrews, studying divinity. And it was not long after that that I started getting involved here in St. Andrew's Baptist Church, and pretty quickly got involved in the ministry team that coordinates our live streaming and worship music and things like that. The heart of St. Andrew's Baptist Church digital ministry journey has really come out of the experience that we've had with the COVID-19 pandemic, as I'm sure is the case with a lot of churches. We have seen that people were struggling to participate in the church, people were struggling to feel connected, and so we really wanted to invest in our digital ministry going forward, knowing that even after the pandemic subsides, there will still be people who are unable to travel to our physical space or who are, for whatever reason, simply unable to join us in person. And so we've invested pretty heavily in the digital ministry side of things for the purposes of continuing to allow those people to be in our community, feel connected to our community, feel connected to our team, to our people, and to each other. Some of the fruits of the live stream and digital ministries that we've seen have been the engagement of some folks that wouldn't normally otherwise be able to engage in our services here. You might not be able to
Sorry guys, it's also here. I don't know if you had the audio had dropped out in that video.
Yeah, the audio dropped out for me.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'll see if I can bring it back. Okay, cheers.
Okay.
and to each other. Some of the fruits of the live stream and digital ministries that we've seen have been the engagement of some folks that wouldn't normally otherwise be able to engage in our services here. You might not be able to see from where we have our sanctuary is actually upstairs. And so there are folks that are not able to access the physical space. And so we've been able to rebroadcast some of those services for folks downstairs, as well as for folks who are at home. For every one of our services that we live stream, which is all of the services, we've got a Zoom host, someone who hosts the service online. They're a welcomer, they're a greeter, they do prayer requests, they kind of manage the service and tell everyone, hey, we're about to get started, let's all be ready, and they'll lead group discussions in prayer, and all of that continues to happen on Zoom with a large number of people, even as we host services once again physically here in the building. Another great thing about that is we'll often have those Zoom people up on our screen. You can see just behind me here. We will move them onto screen and do a time of community prayer at the end of our evening services. People can type their prayer requests or speak their prayer requests, and I'll be down in the tech booth and can receive those and pass them on to the congregation. And the folks at home can pray alongside the folks here in person, and it's a really intimate time, a really personal time where we can all kind of come together and bridge the gap between the physical church and the digital church. And we really do just exist as one church community in that moment. We have seen God at work in this digital sphere over the past 18 months, largely in the sustenance of our congregation. People have felt connected to the church. People have felt connected to the community. In the future, we're hoping to expand some of this out. We've got a lot of student outreach ministries that we're hoping to take advantage of the digital sphere. We're looking to really take advantage of the way we do digital ministry by reaching out to students with social media and sports ministries and gaming groups and all that sort of stuff, which will all happen digitally. So St. Andrews is a college town, and we got a lot of incoming uni students every year, and we're really excited for that in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, hi everyone. We seem to have a problem with that video, so you can't beat the digital seminar that doesn't have the digital video working. So we're not quite sure what the problem is there, but we're going to skip past it. Here's the key lesson. St. Andrews leaned in to the fact that they had an opportunity with the digital situation, and they invested in it, and they took the time to understand it and use the skills they had in their church. And they see not only the way that they were able to draw their church together, but also a way that they were able to use it to reach out. And particularly, they were just beginning to talk there about the ways in which they were able to use it to reach students and a whole new generation of people with the gospel. So they've done amazing work, and we're grateful for it. And that video will be available on the Baptist Union website and our YouTube channel afterwards. So please do go and have a look at it. It's really well worthwhile having a look at. We're going to pop a poll up in the chat just now. And we would love it if you were willing to just go along, click on the link that's there in the chat, poll number 1, and we'll be able to then just answer the simple question that is there, asking the question of how has your experience of online church been during the pandemic. And we'd love to hear from you on that. So please do crack on there, just pop over and click the little button, and then we'll get the chance to have a look at that again in a minute and see how everybody's was. And then we've got a second poll that we want to do later. But you've heard enough from me. You've heard a little bit from St. Andrews, not as much as we like to. But let's be honest, none of you are here to hear from me. You're all here to hear from Jonas. So I want to hand over to Jonas for the next 15 minutes or so, who's going to bring us a presentation and explain to us something of digital theology. Jonas, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Tech is wonderful when it works. It's a bit frustrating when it doesn't. So I hope that we'll have a useful and a good time together and be able to engage with one another. It's a wonderful video, so do have a look at that from St. Andrews. And I'll be really interested to see what you say in the poll and what your experience of the pandemic and online worship and online church has been. And maybe we can have a little bit of conversation around that towards the end. So I just want to start with saying that, you know, churches have actually been online in various ways before the pandemic, you know, even just through simple websites. But what happened during the pandemic was that digital technology was used in unprecedented ways, and particularly by bringing worship online. And so some churches and some ministers embraced this as an opportunity to renew the church and its life and its mission, and others begrudgingly or grudgingly adopted the technology just to be able to get through these very difficult circumstances. So how we relate to technology is partly to do with our personality and our personality traits, as well as our digital or our technical literacy. But regardless of your basic outlook, I think that it's worth reflecting on technology and some of the issues at stake. And that's what I'm tending to do just for a few moments. I've got 13 points I want to share with you, and I'll go quite fast. So my first point is we are tool making and tool using creatures. And one can argue that this is actually part of what it means to be created, imago Dei, in the image of God, a God who creates and makes things and extends things, the ultimate technologist. And in Genesis 2:19, we even see how God asked Adam to name the animals. And I would argue that even language can be seen as technology. It's a tool that extends our capacity as human beings. So there's a kind of a biblical rationale and legitimacy in using technology. Secondly, technology is neither good nor bad, but it's not neutral. So technology itself or technological artifacts don't have moral agency, but they do kind of change the rules of our play and how we engage. So one example of this will be how the early church adopted the codex over against the scroll as the carrier of the Bible. Now, on one level, the scroll, the codex, is simply more a practical means of containing the Bible that could easily be distributed across the ancient world and amongst the churches. It made the Bible more accessible and more mobile. But also, the Codex Bible, in its materiality, in its very design, communicates that there is a beginning and an end. That these books brought together is a continuous story of a bigger story. The covers of the book communicates that there's a finality to these biblical books and that the canon is closed. Nothing can be added, nothing can be detracted. So in other ways, the digital Bibles today are changing again the rules of how we engage with the scriptures. And I'll be happy to talk about that more further on. But it exemplifies that the technology isn't just tools that we use. They're not neutral. They change things. They do things. They change the way we interact and the way we come to see the world itself. Number 3, the church has always used technology in worship, ministry, and missions. And I'd just like to encourage you to have a little think about how churches are using technology, even today and even in the past. And once you start thinking about it, you realize that technology is all around me. So I don't know if you'd like to type some of your ideas in the chat, that would be great. But just on the top of my own head, you know, we can even mention things like buildings or tables or chairs or windows or books or language. I mean, these days we tend to think more of technology in terms of modern technology or digital technology, such as speaker systems, video projectors and so forth. But technology is all around us, and the church have used it for ministry and mission since the very beginning. And the example here that I've put on the slide is just the Roman roads that were instrumental in the early church and in how it spread the gospel so quickly across the Roman world. Fourthly, media technology is central to worship. So liturgical objects are in fact media technology in itself. They serve to direct the worshipper's attention to God. And so just think about the architecture of a cathedral for a moment, and just the way how it seeks to direct the worshipper's attention towards God, or a stained glass window which tell the stories of the Bible. We can say then that worship is always mediated through technology. In some ways, digital technology is simply a continuation of this long tradition of using technology for worship. And part of what we need to reflect on is how we form new liturgical practices through digital technology in an online environment. Number 5. Digital communication and practices are not disembodied. And this is an argument actually made quite early on by Baptist theologian Paul Fiddis, who in a short comment in, I think 2009, it was a comment on online sacrament. And there he argued, and I tend to agree with him, that it's not disembodied because actually we need to use our bodies when we engage online. We're using our senses, our eyes, our fingers, our ears, essentially our bodies. But also technology and technological artifacts and the communication between digital artifacts are themselves a product of human manipulation of material objects, such as metals, photons, radio waves, and so on. Number 6. When it comes to ecclesiology, community has always been essential to this and essential to what makes church church. Jesus says in that famous verse in Matthew 18:20, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them. Now, the authenticity and quality of a community online is therefore something that we do need to consider. My basic contention is that digitally mediated communication and relationships, they are actually real. Online spaces are simulated environments, but in some ways, so are our church buildings. They are created by humans. And I think that the semantics of virtual, when we talk about online engagement, is actually unhelpful, because it conflates the online with something that is not quite real or maybe inauthentic. But I would argue that I'm engaging with people online. When I engage with people online, as far as I'm concerned, I'm actually really engaging with people. There's nothing unreal or inauthentic about speaking with someone on FaceTime or on Zoom. I just had a call from my nephew who's highly autistic and has some learning disabilities, and he calls me all the time. And it's a fantastic way of maintaining a relationship with him. He calls every day and we have a little chat. But there's nothing unreal about that. It's a real relationship. And we could even point to biblical precedences of this. So if you think about how Paul used the letters to send across the different churches to maintain his fellowship with them virtually. Number 7, online communities and interaction are different from offline ones. And so returning again to the example of Paul, he fully believed that he was in fellowship with the churches that he corresponded with through letters. But nevertheless, he still expressed his longing to be present with them. And so we see this in Philippians 1:8, for example. And I think most of us can relate to this. There is some difference here that however good the online interaction is, we do prefer to meet on site with our friends and family. And we can discuss why that is. But that does not mean that online community, online relationships are not meaningful, authentic, or, can't be very deep. In some ways, digital communication is making possible relationships where relationship wasn't previously possible. Now, a big difference between online communication is that its members no longer are in community geographically in a geographical location. They can be separated. And I think this is a part of a wider trend that we find in society, which has been labeled network society. And that means that one of the things that happens online is that we no longer need to be in the same geographical proximity. And it's probably worth thinking about, especially for church ministers in local church ministry, what actually that means for how they minister. And one thing that does happen is that actually people have a greater choice now in where they find and where they choose to have spiritual nourishment. And we will talk a little bit more with Glenn further on about kind of consumeristic tendencies that the online can create. Number 8, digital modes of ministry do not have to compete with offline modes. they can act in supplementary ways. Often I find that people pit the one against the other, and I don't think it has to be that way. If we see online not as a competition towards the offline or the on-site worship, then actually, they can influence and strengthen one another. And Tim Hutchins, who I used to work with at the Center for Digital Theology, or CODEC, it used to be then, he's probably the scholar who's done most kind of ethnographic research on online communities, online Christian communities. And what he found in his studies is that actually most of the members of these online communities often, and this is way before the pandemic, often were also part of local communities. And I think that's also how things are going to develop past the pandemic, that we're going to start thinking of how we can use this technology in supplementary ways. Number 9, online practices can exclude some who are normally included in our churches, but include others who are normally excluded from our on-site church activities. And I think we heard this a little bit, if you caught that in the video from the church in St. Andrews. That's what they found. They're actually able to reach people that they were not able to do before. And so, yes, it is true that we need to think carefully about those who, for various reasons, not least that they don't have the know-how or can't afford the technology, and we need to think carefully about how we can include those in online activities. I know that some churches are very active about this during the pandemic. I spoke to church leaders in Singapore where they would go around to especially elderly people's homes and help them set up and help them teach them basic digital skills of how so they could join in, especially the online worship. But actually, and this is one of the things I find really interesting with online church, is actually it forces us to think again about our taken for granted practices and on-site worship in our church buildings. Actually, a lot of our church buildings are not accessible places. They exclude people who with disabilities. They are very scary places for people who are unchurched. And it's difficult to come to for people who are working weekends. Number 10, we are not bound by technological determinism. And by that, I mean that actually we can use technology in different ways. We can choose to use technology in different ways. And we can use it dependent on our personality, our particular needs of our community and the context of our church community, our abilities and the wider support that we get, and also our theologies. Number 11, digital technology is not monolithic. So, when we talk about online church, for example, there are lots of different expressions of that. And there are lots of different artifacts, platforms, gadgets that have, I would argue, different social, cultural impacts and outcomes. And their practical and theological utilization, therefore, has to be assessed each on their own merits. And even we need to think about some of the ethical implications of the way we use technology and what technologies we use. Now, if we have a Zoom service, it has a very different feel, a very different outcome than having a online streaming on YouTube. So it's just one example of the differences. Number 12, there is a strong case that can be made for continuing streaming services beyond the pandemic. Because it does allow members who are not able to make it to the church building to join. And lots of churches have also, during the, can I have a look at can you bring up the PowerPoint? Okay. Yes, okay, number 12, please. Sorry, that's fine. So we'll finish with my last point, actually, number 13. Now, I think at the end, whether you choose and how you choose to use digital technology in ministry, and whether you decide to discard God altogether, you cannot escape the fact that we live now in a digital culture. Digital technology is having a huge ramification on our culture, and it will shape you as individuals as well as the communities that you are ministering in, regardless of how you use technology and what you think of technology yourself. Now, I've kind of used some memes throughout the presentation, just maybe to illustrate, an aspect of digital culture and how prevalent it is. Memes have their own rules and social cues. They change the way we interact with one another. Another example that comes to mind, what I thought was quite interesting, and how technology is changing the way we see our world, is actually my son Silas, who's 8 years old. And in the summer, we climbed Scafell Peak, which is the highest mountain in England, I believe, and the Lakes District. And it's a wonderful hike. And as you come up through the valleys and up in the mountains, you look down, you turn around, you look down, there's a fantastic lake down, and you can even see the other mountains and lakes, and then you can see the sea. And my son goes, Dad, it's just like Google Maps. So digital is shaping the way we see the world. And digital culture is becoming the environment in which you're ministering. And so there is a missional imperative to understand this culture as well. Okay, Glenn, I'm going to hand back to you, and perhaps we can have a little chat about any of that, or maybe we bring up the poll.
Brilliant. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jonas. That was super helpful. I just realised I've turned my camera around the other way. Let me fix that. There we go. That's much better. Now you can see me in full glorious width, and there's plenty of width of me. Jonas, that was brilliant. Really, really helpful. First of all, guys, it would be great if you're watching today, if you've got questions or thoughts, if you could pop those in the chat, because we really do want to gather together the chance to have a proper Q&A with Jonas in a little bit. That was so rich, Jonas. It genuinely is going to take ages to process an awful lot of that. But there was one thing you said that I think at least I would be interested in, and I suspect others might be too. And it's this question here. You were dealing with this question of whether that tech is itself neither good nor bad, but it's also not neutral. And you spoke very helpfully, I think, about the codex versus the scroll, and we can see how that's transitioned through it. And I love that idea of the fact that the codex creates a beginning and an end and a fullness to it. And you kind of hinted at the fact that kind of digital Bibles, as one example of that, might be something we're worth thinking about. So if I think about my own church, Sunday mornings, it's time to read the scriptures. And very few people these days bring out their 3-inch thick Bible and start flipping through. Instead, it's straight to YouVersion, right? Which is a gift to us in many ways. But I'm wondering, what do you think the impact of that reliance on digital Bibles does? Is it good, bad, or whatever?
Yes, I guess I think there are different aspects of that, but it's a really interesting question. But I think there are a couple of things that we need to think about when it comes to digital Bibles. One thing is fantastic. I mean, let's be honest, it's great. It is a gift. You can carry your Bible with you everywhere. You've got thousands of different translations. In your pocket, always carrying the Bible with you. I mean, that is phenomenal. And, it's, I think YouVersion that you mentioned has been downloaded almost 500 million times. So
Wow.
It's just astounding. It's actually one of the top most downloaded apps that are around.
Wow.
Now, there are a few things that are worth thinking about. One is that there is research that seems to suggest that cognitively, we don't process information that we read on a screen in the same way as we read in a printed book. So the research shows, for example, that your memory doesn't pick up as much when you read on a scroll. So those are kind of things that might be worth thinking about. But I think also, there are other things that we could be thinking about in terms of, what kind of relationship do we actually have with the Bible through a digital Bible? Now, a lot of people have a very personal, relationship with their particular printed Bible that they might have carried around for decades. And so, are you going to have that? Does that matter? I mean, I'm not sure. But I think our relationship with the Bible does change. The other more important question is, how does it change the way we view the authority of Scripture? And this is another theological point with a printed book, is that once it's printed, it's permanent. So it communicates a sense of permanency, the eternal. A digital text can be changed within an instant. It's not permanent. I'm trying to think of the theologian at St. Andrews who, he'll come to me. He was preaching somewhere in Scotland, a more conservative church, and overnight, NIB had changed the digital Bible from gender specific to gender neutral language.
Yeah.
But I wonder what that communicates about the permanency of the Bible. So those are just some examples of what we might want to think about.
Yeah, that's really helpful and really interesting. From a discipleship point of view, that question of how much we retain from reading on digital spaces is significant, but also that more sociological question of the personal relationship we often have with our physical Bibles that many of us will have for decades, when most of us will change our phones every 2 or 3 years or whatever, and something fundamentally quite different there. So it's really significant.
I guess it would be worth pointing out, actually, things that I know in the Protestant tradition, we're not so keen on the idea of a sacred item, but I do think that we kind of have that anyway. And the Bible would be one example, but it's worth thinking about that. And actually, a lot of times, sacred items are very ordinary items as well. Right. That we then tend to sacralize. For example, our printed Bibles, we tend to imbue them with a sense of sacred by, having them leather bound, or they're beautiful, And I wonder if something like that's going to happen around a digital Bible, and that whether there is a way of kind of sacralizing them to give them that sense of this is a text that's different from other texts. But that's something that we might see develop with time. Yeah,
brilliant. We've got a couple of other questions that we're going to have a look at here just now. So if you had other questions for Jonas, particularly on his presentation, again, get those popped into the chat and we'll pick them up in a bit. But here's maybe my big question on digital church. And given everything that you've said, I wonder if you could try and help us understand how we avoid online church becoming something that's merely consumed, and not something folks are actively participating in. And I am assuming, therefore, that participation is a good thing for our discipleship, and consumption is a bad thing. So that is definitely the underlying thing. As a friend of mine once said, he said, "Look, Christianity is a contact sport. You can't do it digitally." I'm not sure I'm all the way there, but I do have that sense that we need to be participating. And in what way does the digital church actually just encourage us just to consume rather than to participate?
So I guess there is a risk that we do end up consuming, especially church services online. But I think that is true of any church service. You know, I don't know how many church services I've sat through, and yes, I've been participating by singing and maybe praying a little bit, but you know, actually, we're not that great at participation when it comes to how we have been doing that. And so I think, you know, this opens up for a creative space to rethink the way we run church service. And now I think the potential to participate is actually greater in some ways in an online service. I mean, it's a bit hard to comment for example, on a service, you know, and you know, I know that some conferences, I don't think I've seen it in church service, will have, you know, the Twitter feed, you know, on the screen, so you see people joining in, and there be references to that. Well, you know, that's a kind of example of hybrid church, I think. You know, and how the digital can actually help us to become more participatory. So that if you can encourage people to be part and comment, and if that, I mean, I've seen both. Sometimes, you know, participation in these comments fields is just dead. But you know, sometimes it's flourishing, and you know, you get your amens, and you get your prayers. And there's something about the online that makes people a little bit more vulnerable. So, you know, I don't know what's your experience, Glenn, when it comes to, you know, people participating in online services. But I've been hearing from different, it's probably more anecdotal, but you know, people feel more confident to participate, to say a prayer in an online than they would in a church building.
100%. I mean, what we noticed, particularly at the beginning of lockdown, when we intentionally had lots more people involved in our service, the people that I'd asked to speak in church would, you know, even to do something as simple as a reading, would never have done it. And yet they were very comfortable once they figured out the technology, but they were very comfortable to do a reading from a Zoom space, and we're now experiencing the exact opposite of that as we move back into our building. Those people who were happy to do readings in Zoom are back to being nervous about being in front of people. So we're playing with that. So we had some testimonies we wanted to do, and the people didn't want to do them like that, so we filmed them instead. So that we get the benefit of the story, but it's somehow mediated and easier for folks. I don't quite know what's going on with that, but
no, and it's true, I think. And you know, just picking up a comment here that we've got on from Pilgrim Care, you know, the fact that people can actually ask their questions. You know, this is part of what it means to be in a digital culture. I think is that. In a digital culture, people don't want to be just spoken at. They want to be able, they can speak back. And this is kind of what social media is doing to us, is that it's kind of, we expect to be able to participate, if you want to say it that way. You know, to be fair, you know, that might be sometimes a bit scary for ministers as well.
I'm not sure we all want questions sometimes. Don't know the answers to them.
No, I mean, I guess it's the same in the classroom as well. For me, some questions are, you know, a bit awkward, but hey, but it's great, isn't it, when people show interest in what you're saying and they're picking up from things. So I would definitely encourage that.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know, we hadn't planned to talk about this, so you may not have an answer, but I wonder, what do you think about the notion of the hybrid service? So partially online and partially in person, and the two trying to participate in the same service together. You have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I must admit, I haven't seen it in a way that I think is great, satisfactory, and you know, it might be, you know, that's something, if you know, if anyone who's kind of joining us here have seen it done well, you might want to pitch in the comment field as well and say what your experience has been. But I think the problem with that kind of hybrid model is that the quality of those who are online tends to go drastically down, right?
Okay. So
because the focus ends up being within the church building, and it becomes that, it can easily become that broadcasting logic, you know, where you're basically watching telly. It's a telly service, which you know then does lead to consumerism and doesn't really offer a great experience for those people. But I think there are ways around that, and you know, that is, we heard in the video about the possibility of having someone on Zoom that's monitoring that, that's interacting with people actively who are online. But I think there are ways in which we can blend as well. So even this morning, the service that you led really well, or the meeting that you led really well, Glenn.
Thank you.
You know, those videos that, you know, I watched the video from the couple who'd moved to live on what are they called, the channel boats?
On the houseboat, yeah.
Houseboat, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. And you know, in some ways, you know, if they had just come to a church building and talked about their experience, we wouldn't have got that same sense. So, you know, creating that sense of, you know, like blending the two in a sense, you know, showing a video both online and offline can enjoy. So I think we'll find a way forward. At the moment, my experience is that it's harder for those who are online. But there's still really good reasons to continue online streaming, I think, because it does include people who would otherwise be excluded. But we also know that even before the pandemic, there were churches who were just live streaming services, and it became a window into their church. So for people who are not used to going to church or are exploring different churches, it actually became a first step for them to becoming part of the community.
I mean, that's something I've heard a lot of people talk about as one of the ways they think that digital church is here to stay, is that it'll become a gateway for people, that people checking out churches or whatever are going to want to watch online before they come in person. I mean, there's something about that that's really quite interesting, because it almost assumes, therefore, the digital as a through place rather than as a landing place. And I think that is quite significant, that if we see the digital space as merely a conduit to the physical space, which is maybe the quote unquote real church, then actually we're not really fully embracing the idea of the digital. I don't think. Is that fair?
I think that's an excellent point. I think also that's probably why actually we've seen the quality of, you know, say that for the hybrid services, you know, why we've seen the quality go down, because the assumption is that now we're going back to the church building, we're actually doing the real thing, and that's what's important. And you know, that, you know, some people might reach that conclusion, and I suppose, you know, that is your theology, whatever it is. But if we want to take the digital serious and actually think of it as a serious place where people do engage with, people do have encounter with God, and where people find community, then yeah, we need to reconsider maybe that as well.
Yeah, great. On the basis that we've got lots of comments, not loads of questions, we've got about 10 minutes left, so particularly I've noticed Brian and Pilgrim Care are very invested in the YouTube chat. Guys, if you have any questions for Jonas, now is your moment. Al, I don't know, are we able to pop up the poll that we did at the beginning to see that? Oh, here it comes. Yeah, so only 4 people filled it in, but it was largely a very positive front end of that, so that's good. I suspect lots of people will watch this back again on YouTube. So if you're watching it back on YouTube, think about where you fit in that. Jonas, would you see that as typically representative of what you would expect to see, that people have largely a positive experience?
Probably not, no. There are a few, there's a few, there's some research that have been carrying out, especially in the UK, and one is from, let's see, York, University of York, a team at the University of York that particularly done research and surveys for Anglican clergy and laity. And the predominant view is that, yes, you know, it's been great, but actually, you know, we're not so keen on this. And actually yesterday there was released a report by a team from Manchester Metropolitan and which was the other, Chess University. And that was a more, I think it was included, that was on more on, I think it was titled Ritual Innovation During the Pandemic. And that was more, that included other religious groups than just Christians. But there again, the headlines are the people within those communities found that the online ritual or worship diminishes the experience of worship.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think for most people within the church, that is kind of the sentiment that's at least coming out of these reports.
Great. Okay. Well, we've only got 5 minutes left. Dawn has popped in the chat a question that I think is really helpful, and is actually around the kind of question that I wanted to kind of have us round up with. That we see the big church is very capable of the technological requirements of doing, whether it's hybrid or a whole separate service or a really high-end broadcast. They have the capability and the resources, both in terms of cash but also people, to do that. This may be outside your realm of expertise, but as we think about what it means for smaller churches, frankly, for your average Baptist church in Scotland, what does it look like to embrace this digital future with the limited resources they have? Are they better not doing anything at all than doing something badly, or should they just give it a go and try?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really difficult question. Thanks, Dawn, for that question. I guess a couple of points. One is that, it's the, investing in the tech itself is not hugely expensive. So you can still, you could potentially stream a service quite easily. And most churches have learned to do that. Yeah. I can't say whether that has a benefit wider than a wider benefit, because I don't know the statistics for that. But I assume that, at least, if you have an elderly person who's been in the church community, been there for 30, 40, 50 years, and suddenly found themselves housebound, to be able to at least see the service from their home, I think, actually at a relatively low cost, it doesn't have to be that professional. So I think those are the reasons why we want to think about it at least. But we should also acknowledge that digital is not just streaming online, and digital church is not just streaming services. Yeah. It's a whole different way of engaging and interacting. And I think there are other ways. So, for example, I'm part of several WhatsApp groups. For example, with family, with friends, with church groups, with my students, and what it does, that it allows for that ongoing communication throughout the week. Yeah. Which I think is just really nice. You get someone needs a prayer request, or someone's telling their story, and what it does is that it kind of gives those reminders throughout the week to pause and think and pray. Okay. So even for individually for our devotional life, there are lots of different apps and tools that can give us reminders to help us engage, to stop, reflect, and pause. So, I used an app that gives notifications. So my pocket vibrates a couple of times a day, and it helps me to stop and just pray for a moment. So, there are other digital ways than just the service. But there are final point. But even for smaller churches, there are so many resources online that you don't have to produce your content yourself. Yeah. Yeah. So that was just my final.
No, that's really helpful, and I think it's also worth mentioning that as a family of churches, we've made an appointment in Alley Lane to our digital church lead to really resource the church as widely as possible. So if you do have questions about digital church and how your church can carry that on, then please do get in touch with Ali at the Baptist Union, and he will be able to do that. And there's some great stuff in the comments there about us actually embracing in the actual in-person service, embracing technology in that space. So we've used a poll. We were going to use a second one, but we've run out of time, so we'll be fine. But the using things like that in your actual service, because everyone's got a phone in their hand, and so we begin to bring the digital, embracing that into our place. So great question, Annie, and I think that's maybe part of the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And using polls, I do that regularly in classes, and it's just a way of opening up conversation and giving that little hook to get people engaged. I think it's helpful.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to have to roll that into my preaching in the next few weeks, where we'll have a poll, we'll have a QR code, and it'll be riotous. We will see. Listen, I think we're going to call it there. We are just about out of time. Jonas, thank you so much for taking the time today to share with us. It genuinely has opened my mind, and I'm sure many others, to some of the real depth that there is in this whole question of just how do we do digital church, and what is it that we're trying to do, and what are the challenges and all that sort of stuff. If people wanted to read more or hear more from you, is there somewhere they could access that?
Sure. I think actually Brian mentioned in the chat the book I've edited on Missio Dei in the digital age. That might be one place to go to. There is, if you want to have a little bit more understanding of what's happening in digital theology, so academic discipline that I'm part of, there is the Global Network for Digital Theology. There is a YouTube channel that you can find the kind of current discussions about that. Do a general search on digital theology, and you'll find lots of stuff come your way.
And if we can find you on Twitter, and then you tweet and repost a bunch of interesting things as well, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Brilliant. Jonas, thank you. I'm sure everyone here has found this as enlightening and in some ways challenging, as I have. So it's been brilliant to have you here. And a huge thank you to all of you who have watched this live and have participated in the chat. That's great. Thank you very much. And also to Al, who's in the background making the tech work. Big thumbs up to Al, who has made this work in what which has been great. So absolutely massive thank you to Al. Thank you to you for coming. Don't forget that there's an the church session tomorrow with the rest of Canopy. And if you missed any of the sessions, you'll be able to go back on YouTube and catch up with them. Thank you, Jonas. Thank you all for being with us, and bless you all.